Though it's only been around since 2019, All Elite Wrestling has already attracted some of the biggest names in wrestling through their doors with offers of compelling storylines, fresh matchups, and that sweet, sweet cold Khan cash. Some of these stars made highly impactful, highly memorable first impressions, whilst others sort of just appeared backstage whilst everyone went, wait a second, isn't that? Today we will be focusing on the first one, which I think we can all agree is much more exciting. Most mediocre debuts just doesn't have quite the same appeal, does it? I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 greatest AEW debuts so far. Join us! Number 10, Brody Lee. The March 18th, 2020 episode of Dynamite was scheduled to take place in the town of Rochester, New York, until a very bad thing happened to the world involving some small spiky balls of disease. So, the episode happened in front of 0 people at Daly's place in Jacksonville, Florida instead, which was a shame as this was the night that Rochester's own Brody Lee made his first AEW appearance. Formerly known as WWE superstar Luke Harper, Lee was revealed as the much-hyped and teased Exalted One, the leader of the Dark Order. In a brilliantly produced video package that looked like something out of the movie Seven, Lee announced his arrival by challenging Christopher Daniels, who he said was not the first out-of-touch old man not to believe in him. Wonder what he meant by that. Had this moment happened in front of Brody's hometown crowd, it likely would have been much higher on this list. But even so, the exquisitely made video, plus the fact that very few people saw this reveal coming, everyone thought that Matt Hardy was going to be the Exalted One, made for a wonderful introduction of a wonderful and much missed performer. Number 9, William Regal. At Revolution 2022, Jon Moxley and Danielson waged war in a match to see which style was better: technical craftsmanship honed over years of practice, or knocking the stuffing out of somebody with blood pouring down your face. Spoiler, the latter one. Even though Mox won the match, the action didn't stop after the bell as both men continued to scrap. Several trainers and security guards ran down to the ring to try to stop the madness, but the fists kept flying until the arrival of a certain English lord. Down the ramp strode William Regal, who had been let go from WWE just 2 months earlier after 2 decades with the company. Nobody expected to see him in the building that night, least of all Moxley and Danielson, both of whom had a history with the former NXT general manager. Regal's arrival was not only shocking, but it also led to these 2 opponents teaming up to form the Blackpool Combat Club, a stable with a huge presence in AEW to this very day. Regal's AEW debut was subtle, surprising, and highly effective, just like the man himself. Number 8, FTR. After years of being misused and held down on WWE's main roster, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder of The Revival were finally let out of their contracts in April 2020, free to go wherever they wanted. Well, if there wasn't a dirty great pandemic going on at the time anyway. Not one to let the apocalypse keep them down, Dawson and Wilder, now known as Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler respectively, finally arrived in AEW in May, confronting the team that had been taking the mick out of them online for years, the Young Bucks. Harwood and Wheeler, collectively known as FTR, rocked up at Daly's place in a pickup truck and confidently made their way towards the Bucks, who were getting beaten down by the Butcher and the Blade. However, in a move no one saw coming, the top guys actually came to Nick and Matt's defense, fending off their attackers and standing side by side with their nemesis. Not pitting FTR against the Bucks immediately was an effective way of teasing out their dream match, which eventually took place at that year's Full Gear. It is a shame that no fans were there when they actually debuted, but at least they had a sweet ride, eh? Number 7, Sera. After Toni Storm defended her AEW Women's Championship at Grand Slam 2022, Britt Baker, Jamie Hayter, and Serena Deeb all behaved like adults and let the victor bask in the glory of her win. Just kidding, obviously, they beat the heck out of her. When all hope looked lost for the Aussie, strange music began playing over the Arthur Ashe loudspeakers. This fanfare heralded the AEW arrival of Sera, formerly known in WWE as Paige. The New York crowd came unglued when the Norwich native walked out on stage, soaking up the adulation like it was rain on a typical English summer's day. Sera had been presumed retired after suffering a devastating neck injury in 2017, so when she got physical with Baker during this segment, fans' jaws hit the floor. Though she has been controversial at times, Sera was still pivotal to the evolution of women's wrestling in WWE and therefore in the business in general. The fact that she was now in All Elite Wrestling was a big deal, even if her her in-ring ability had suffered slightly due to her various knocks. Not that I'm one to talk, she could still wrestle rings around me. Number 6, Malachi Black. Whilst conducting an in-ring interview with Arn Anderson on the July 7th, 2021 edition of Dynamite, Tony Schiavone said that life was good for the former Horseman. In doing so, he inadvertently cursed Anderson to get his face smashed in about a minute later. Hey, cursing is Danhausen's gimmick, Tony. The enforcer barely got time to threaten somebody with a handgun before the lights in the arena went out. When they came back up, who should be standing in the ring but former NXT champion Aleister Black? Now using the first name Malachi, Black unleashed a brutal spin kick on Anderson, dropping into the floor as Schiavone just sort of walked away from the ring like he wanted nothing to do with anything that was going on. Black had been released by WWE in June, which should have prevented him from competing anywhere for another 90 days. However, in a hilarious administrative botch, his contract was never upgraded from his NXT days, giving him a 30-day non-compete clause instead. This allowed the Dutchman to make his devious debut for AEW, and he's been a solid hand there ever since. Number 5, Jon Moxley. We could have counted everyone who appeared at AEW's first ever show, Double or Nothing 2019, as having made their debut that night, in which case the number 1 spot on this list would have gone to Glacier, obviously. Instead, we are saving this space for a man who made his presence felt right at the end of the show, a man who hadn't been advertised for the card, a man who would go on to become one of, if not the defining figure in AEW. Jon Moxley. Please don't tell him I got his name wrong. The former Shield man came in through the crowd and slithered into the ring behind Chris Jericho, who had just won the night's main event. An all-out brawl ensued, with Moxley taking down everyone, including Jericho, Kenny Omega, and even the poor old ref. The final shot of the night was Moxley standing atop a giant pile of casino chips, having just sent Omega falling to his doom with a fireman's carry slam. In the space of about 5 minutes, he had gone from not being in the company at all to being one of its must-see attractions. Number 4, Sting. At Winter is Coming 2020, Kenny Omega defeated Jon Moxley for the World Championship, and Don Callis announced a working relationship between AEW and Impact Wrestling. And yet, somehow, the coolest thing on the whole show was a 61-year-old man in face paint walking out of some fake snow. Following their loss to Darby Allin and Cody Rhodes, Team Taz took their frustrations out on the goodies by beating them down. Cue the lights going out, snow falling from the sky, creepy videos of crows, and the debut of, in the words of Tony Schiavone, Sting! This was the Icon's first appearance on a TNT wrestling show since he and Ric Flair wrestled in the final ever WCW Nitro match some 18 or so years earlier. In fact, this was his first appearance on wrestling TV of any kind since he'd been on Raw for Flair's 70th birthday back in 2019. One of the biggest wrestling stars to ever live had just turned up in AEW, and it felt every bit as monumental as it should have. He has been a valuable resource since, and, like Sera, has defied the doctors who claimed his bumping days were done. Number 3, Adam Copeland. The most recent debut on this list happened at AEW's Wrestle Dream event in October of 2023. Following a brutal match over the TNT Championship, Christian Cage defeated his challenger Darby Allin thanks to the newly heel Nick Wayne. Then, just as Cage was about to hit Darby's mentor Sting with a concerto, a video of a man getting into a car with some guitar music playing underneath it started playing. That music was the intro to the song Cry of Achilles by the band Alter Bridge, which should have been the first clue. With 5 simple words, you think you know him, and about 500 metric tons of steam, the man best known as Edge made his first AEW appearance going by his real name of Adam Copeland. The Rated R superstar teased joining his old buddy before smacking Wayne with a chair, taking out Luchasaurus, and ending the night on the highest of highs. Copeland had been a WWE man through and through, with many believing he would be there forever. So to see such a bastion of that company turn up for the competition, well, it totally reeked of awesomeness. Number 2, Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson. All Out 2021 will go down in wrestling history for many reasons, and 2 of them are right here at number 2 on our list. Following Kenny Omega's win over a non-dead dad era Christian Cage in the main event, the AEW champion claimed that the only people that could beat him were already dead. Cue the debut of Mr. Adam Cole, a man that had been killed on Being the Elite back in the day. It was a weird show, don't ask. Instead of getting revenge on Omega and the Bucks, Cole joined forces with them, super-kicking Jungle Boy and yucking it up with his buddies. This was how the night was going to end, or so we all thought. All of a sudden, the opening to Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries started to play, and whilst most pro wrestling fans couldn't give a toss about classical music, they all knew this piece as the theme song of the American Dragon. Bryan Danielson made his AEW debut, 4 months on from his last match in WWE. In the space of one night, the entire landscape of AEW had changed, and my god was it a great time to be a fan. Number 1, CM Punk. When rumours began to swirl that CM Punk might be making his pro wrestling comeback in August of 2021, people were initially skeptical. Then more outlets started to report the news. Then it was announced that AEW had booked a giant arena in Chicago for the second episode of Rampage. Then Darby Allin used the phrase "best in the world" on Dynamite. Suddenly, all that skepticism began to fade away. Any remaining doubt was blown out of the water on that episode of Rampage on August 20th, when the Second City's favourite son made his official return to wrestling after 7 long years away. The moment those static sounds hit, the crowd lost their minds and welcomed Punk back into the business with open arms as he drank in the adulation of the people that had missed him so much. This is not only the greatest AEW debut of all time, but it's also one of the greatest debuts of any kind and one of the biggest moments in all of wrestling to have happened this side of the millennium. And they all lived happily ever after. Cheers for watching.